forward to this conversation, to be honest, because I do not know anything about the subject. Well, I know very little about the subject, but I've got two supermen with me right now, and I was going through your profiles and I was like, damn it, I will be caught if I try to be smart. So I'm not going to. I am just going to lightly ask you the questions that I said I would be asking. So just to give everybody a bit of a sense over here, we have Mr. Sanjeev Kumar. He is the CTO at Pine Labs. Pine Labs itself is over 2 decades old as a company. And Sanjeev, if I'm not mistaken, has been there for nearly 14 years now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sanjeev, go for it. And we also have Rohit Garg, another really, really smart head between us. Rohit is the co-founder at SmartCoin. I understand he had 3 more, and he has 3 more partners. I'm guessing they're all IIT alumnus who started this. And he is a 5-year-old brand, actually. So it is quite a mix that we have over here of experience and then the nimble new footers who came in place and were really disrupting the market. Both are deep tech companies. So the topic is really apt for you right now, and I should officially welcome you both. I'm going to take advantage of both of your experiences overall and then what you make of the market right now. Everybody went through a little bit of a crash course in technology last year, but you guys were really in the thick of things, and arguably you had a better year than most people because technology seemed to have leapfrogged by like a decade. So our topic is very simple, which is creating a secure and fraud prevention, robust infrastructure for FinTech. I was being mean when I said it's simple because when I was reading about it, I was like, this is all over the place. So, just for people like me out there, how would we keep it simple when we start? And the first thing that I want to look at, I'm going to pose this question to both of you, which is really how should companies look to integrate fraud prevention programs in their companies? What probably are some areas to watch out for? I do want to go on the tech side of it also a bit, but then, I'm going to begin with Sanjeev over here right now. Sanjeev, just give us the first sense of it, which is what are some of the things that companies can do? I mean, you would have seen a massive form of evolution at your own side in the way you would have kept up in your game, keeping your own, the merchants that connect with you safe, et cetera, et cetera. So just give a sense of what are some of the do's and don'ts perhaps when companies think about fraud prevention programs?
Yeah, thanks. Prior to answering that, let me thank you all for having me here, right? This topic is too wide, right? That how do and there is no a definite answer to it. Discipline is the key there, right? So first of all, I think there is a common term which I use across in any panel. I say, if compliance is a formality, then compromise is going to happen, right? So make a practice that people adhere to it. So remove the word compliance, control H with adherence in your company. So it means people have to adhere to what you write. If you say that security principles are to be followed, people have to adhere to it. If you say that passwords are to have this pattern, people have to adhere to it. If passwords are to be this should not be simply that my password policy says that it expires in 45 days. Force the expiry. So I'm saying about, first of all, insider, compromise, right? Outside, you can put a lot of, offenses that, do's and don'ts. Being a payment company, you are anyway bound to comply and adhere to many things, be it PCI-DSS. For Pine Labs, I can talk about we are PCI-DSS, we are PADSS, we are PCI Visa PIN, and we are since the card data and the PIN block passes through us in the offline world, we are also under the scrutiny of all the networks and the acquiring banks. We process EMI loans, so we are under the scrutiny of issuing banks also. But so coming back to the original question of do's and don'ts, right? So do's and don'ts it that get the best world class infra for your payment gateways. Put the good quality WAF. Be patched. Your patching policies have to be very, very regular. Your get and give access to the things which are required. Care for the data at rest equally than the data in transit. So the data in transit, everybody talks of, well, I have got HTTPS, but HTTPS takes care of your data in transit only. But once you see that data has landed at my home, you feel that your data is safe. But what if there was one vulnerability which got exposed and somebody is able to enter your house and your data at rest was lying purely plain, and you didn't pay as much attention to it, then you pay to the data in transit. So that's where the compromises mostly happen. And if you see the studies, the data in transit is not the area of interest. The data at rest is the gold mine. If you get the hand of it, your GBs of data is lying in open. And retain and store what you really need. And if somebody has stated that you don't need to have card pan and your business doesn't need it, don't even try to have it thinking that tomorrow you will make something out of it. The risk side is much more impactful and can be dooming than the possible gain you can have in future.
All right, fair enough. I have to admit that a lot of that is something that I would probably go back and then search and read up more. But I did get the broad gist. I'm good at shopping, so I got 2 points of view that you said, or rather 2 points that that have struck out with me. One, I love the fact the way you formulated when you said that compliance, if formality is equal to compromise, use adherence. Good advice for everybody. And then the choices when you are trying to build in something, and don't get carried away. Just to build on that, Rohit, let's get you in over here. The technologies, especially for somebody like me, and I'm sorry I'm comparing it to shopping, but choices are something that are out there. Even in terms of technologies, we keep hearing new things coming up all the time. Our own CTO at BW Businessworld has these new solutions, and he's like, these guys are really doing well right now. The first thing we want to ask him is that, how do you know they're doing well? How do you know they're going to stay, and they wouldn't have some kind of a breach or problem later? So, I know it's not a fair question, but just because we're delving on this topic, from your point of view, when we are talking about fraud detection tools and technologies, for example, what is it that you bear in mind when you're looking at it? In terms of when you're looking at creating a robust infrastructure, what are maybe some of the checklists, for want of a better word?
Right. So thanks, Noor, for hosting me. Right. So Sanjeev obviously talked a lot about how the security, the general compliances, as well as how do you go beyond that, right? I talk about fraud specifically because obviously fraud, one, I think at a broad level, I think obviously all of us understand fraud, but then I think it also starts to go deeper based on the domain and the thing that you're doing, right? And fraud actually becomes very important because we have seen globally companies, right? Who have actually died overnight just because fraud ballooned up in the system. For lending companies, I would say there are two ways of risk, right? One is fraud risk, another is the intent risk, right? So what's their propensity to pay on a loan? What we have seen is intent does not change overnight, right? Good guys will not change their intent overnight unless say something like COVID happens, but generally does not change that much. Fraud is something that can, just shoot up, right? Because especially for a company like us, which is giving loans to the underserved masses in India in 100% digital model. So through our platform, we have already given loans from our single office in Bangalore across all the states and more than 90% districts in India. So as far as Arunachal Pradesh or Andaman, Nicobar or Jammu Kashmir, we have given loans, right? So now it becomes very important for us because, as we know, right, once people hear that, there is an app which gives you loan without even meeting you. So they'll now obviously try to come up with all sort of tricks and, fancy stuff. So there are few things that I think we have tried to take care of, right? And which is, I think, pretty much important for anyone who is doing this. Number one is, how do you make sure that you have complete checks on identity? Because people will do a lot of, ID forge and ID theft. Now, I think Aadhaar India Stack obviously was quite an amazing, advancement on that front. But unfortunately, it's not available in the same format to all the platforms in FinTechs, right? Obviously, banks have access. So then you have to basically build your own infra, layers on top of it. So for instance, I think one of the things that we do is any user that is coming onto our system, right? We say we'll not only look at whether it's, Aadhaar or other, PAN documents are verified or not, but we actually go well beyond that, right? So say if a user comes in the system, we actually start mapping him through multiple identifiers. It could be through his email, through the device that he's logging in, through the identity documents he's providing, right? And I think one of the important things there is also some things are hard identifiers, some are soft identifier. So hard identifier could be if a guy came up with a PAN, which was already used to take a loan application and he's now coming as a fresh guy. It's obviously a clear fraud, right? So you don't want to give loan to that guy. But a soft identifier could be that a guy actually created a profile on this phone device. earlier, and now there is a fresh profile which is being created on this. Now it might be someone from the family, it could be someone who basically gained unlawful access to the device. How do you differentiate between the two, right? Do you raise a red flag or a warning, or do you like block him? So all these sort of nuances then become more and more important. But the first thing is you should be able to track, you should be able to capture it, right? So you should create the infrastructure and basically the engines to support it. In fact, I'll give you another interesting example, right? Early on, when you start actually capturing all these guys, so some of the guys who actually were frauds, they will try to, create multiple profiles. They'll come from a different phone or the same phone, but a different SIM, or they'll go to the village and, get IDs of like his known, long relative. But once they were not able to do it, what they'll do, like someone has taken a loan. And when his EMI is due, what he'll do, like he'll ask his wife or his father to get loan as a fresh guy, use that money to repay his loan, and then basically take another loan to repay that EMI. So in the process, they are showing that both of them are good borrowers while they are not, right?
Right.
So now how do you identify it, right? Because now this becomes a second degree level of fraud, right? Not the first degree. So it becomes that complicated, but if you understand it, right, you can start combating it, right? And then it becomes actually a far more deeper, far more effective way of capturing like frauds in the system. So I think what's very important, like what I'm trying to say is, I think you should clearly identify. In fact, I would suggest that you should have a separate team which is only trying to figure this, because frauds by design, they generally start small, right? I mean, frauds don't balloon up until a certain stage. But if you keep allowing, that leakage to happen, then at a certain point, you won't even come to know, and it will, would have eroded, wealth like from your systems. So I think you should have separate team, you should have focused infra to capture this systematically. And I think that is something which allows you to then, I think, build on top of it. So I think this is something that I think could be a good start for someone who's trying to create that.
All right, brilliant. Just give me a sense right now over here, and we're going to broad base this totally across, and we'll take advantage of among our registered delegates today. We have like many startups actually, whose names that I saw, and many SMEs. The costs. When it comes to actually putting your technology together, while it has become essential right now, many times there was like a cost barrier if you were trying to do something well. From both of your experiences, you can just weigh in right now. Is this a thing of the past where the tech cost is now not something that should hold you back? Or it's just in our mindsets right now? Or it is going to, when you say, like a focused team or dedicated approach, it means that you will have to shell out that much from your purse?
Right. Sanjeev, do you want to go first or?
Go ahead.
Sure. So, see, I think there are two components to it, right? One, I think, is the infra cost, and one is the people cost. Yep. I think as far as the infra cost is concerned, I think today, we're in an amazing place, right? So I think with all the cloud systems, and I think they're also getting more and more sophisticated, you obviously get access to, basically infra at a much cheaper cost. You can, do a lot more experimentation, right? So, I would say that, and then that is something which is, again, not as much fixed, right? It essentially builds up in a variable manner, as opposed to earlier where you had to invest a lot in servers and other, sort of infra, which was actually difficult for a startup, right, to begin with. So on that front, I think we are pretty much sorted. Second is the people cost, right? So I think it also, I would say, partly comes down on the DNA and I think the way you are trying to create business, right? So for say someone like us, which started with a goal that, we want to cater to the, say the small shopkeepers or the blue-grey collared workers in India who are spread across all the corners. I think we knew from day zero that I think tech is going to be the biggest differentiator over there, right? And I think you can see that, from the team side, I think it's essentially built like that. But I think what I'll suggest is that I think people will always have a choice to maybe start small, right? So when I say you should have a dedicated team, you don't even need like a 20-member or 30-member team. Even if you're one guy who is just now, basically getting into your system and trying out ways to do like what all frauds are possible, right? Can I come with this thing and, and for this, you don't even need an engineer, honestly, right? Because all the customers who are frauding us, right? They're not essentially sophisticated folks, right? They're the guys who just have so much time at hand that they're thinking of various jugards, right? To get it done. Right. So I think essentially we have like QA in tech, right? Similarly, you can have a QA on the fraud side and these guys can get it done, right? So once you start building it and you start reaping the benefit, then I think like incrementally you can build on it. One thing also I think which you can do right early on to figure how important this is maybe I think once you identify, you start capturing, say, the frauds that were attempted, but you say didn't let them in, right? And if you say create a metric on how much, say, money you saved because of that or how many attempts did you, I think fail, then this also gives you a sense on the size of the problem for you, and accordingly you can start allocating resources in that fashion. So that allows you to make sure you're able to balance that trade-off But I still believe, I think, for companies, depending on your business, I think that's a cost you should not shy away.
Yeah, I got it. So yeah, I do want you to weigh in on this, but I still want to build a little bit on the first point that you had made, which was about the compliance part of it, basically adhering. When we're talking about things like police and procedures, for example, and when companies are really looking at that level, so now we've understood that this is something you must do, it has to happen, everybody tries to do it. The point we're getting at is, how do you do it properly? How do you do it at the right cost? How do you do it with the right partners? So I would understand from you, within the company perspective right now, for you, how were you looking at as a company, as Coin Labs, how were you looking at, or how did your policies and procedures change over a period of time in their ethos, so that you were able to stay robust when it came to your own secure and fraud prevention systems?
So see, I think I'll first go with on the infra and the people side of implementing the current in the current role. In the current era, how do you implement a smart framework for fraud, right? So I think Rohit said one thing, that for a startup, the infra used to be the biggest problem, that you have to have those 100 or 200 K USD in kitty in order before you could ship your hardware in the data center, and before you could write or think of shipping hello world, this 250K were to be apportioned for it, right? So gone are those days. You don't need those any longer, thanks to the cloud providers. You can have your smart TensorFlow program running at a meager sum of 200 USD a month. So it's like getting house on rent, right? So getting servers on rent. So that's also infra part. On people part, there are two things, right? So a part of the QA team could be made a part of the risk ops team. So risk ops team. So whatever you ship, whatever domain you are into, in order to give the proper customer service and keep your service level high and keep your interest aligned and intact, you will have the ops like ops, fin ops, risk ops, right? So concept of risk ops is not new in a way that people who understand the risk threat modeling and the people who can do eyeballing are required. But before that, the programs like so few things, right? So 250 or 300 rules that an outlet. So I give you an example, right? An outlet selling pizza cannot have a transaction ticket size of 5,000 rupees at night 2 a.m. A gold shop cannot start selling at Chennai airport at 4 a.m. So these are certain known frauds, right? These are there is no denial to it, right? Yes. Your ticket size cannot be a step function that in the month of Jan average ticket size was 1 lakh and in the month of Feb it is 10 lakh, right? Mm-hmm. So now there is a predictive modeling element to it. The fear which companies have on predictive modeling is, what if it goes to false positive? Will I lose the business? So then, boss, you train your model then. How will you train your model? Feed more data to it, right? So I think AI/ML, reducing false positive, continuous training of the model, reducing attack surface or fraud surface by involving good risk ops folks, improving your deterministic old school model, that 250 rules by learning could become 300 or 400. I think the attack exposure can be brought down. Now coming to your compliance, so like infra as a service was unbelievable 10 years back, but I feel nothing as a service is unbelievable at the moment. If hardware was the toughest thing to bring on a service, if you ask me, because I have that background of that also, that I could never believe that somebody will be able to will be a spin-off the server of a choice, because OS is installing a flavor of Linux was an activity of 3 days, right? Then put the device drivers on top of it was the activity. So setting up a server used to be the days events, right? And so now these are like at a click of a button, right? You write Terraform script and within 2 minutes you have it, ready. And there was no guarantee what you have tested will work on production. Now the Terraform test just increase the size on production. It is now up and ready. So coming to, compliance. Do I see that happening? Something like cash, compliance as a service? We are not very far off. That should happen because you should have compliance as a service coming. Let's say, let me take a very pointed example. I see again, I'm from the payment firm, so it will always go back to the compliances which are applicable to the payment companies, right? Like so, PCI DSS, 12 major controls. There are sub controls. There are 210 something use cases which come. Quite a few of them are pretty much the infra level, segmentation level, VPC level. A cloud provider has got much more depth of the data, much more control onto it. 80% of that can get covered. If it is a matter of collection of evidence, evidences which are the massive work. So if you ask us, how do we used to do the compliance earlier? Compliance used to be an year-end festival event, wherein auditors you used to come. Auditors used to be like meeting or 3-4 meeting rooms booked for them. We used to have the festival across this thing, right? This was a matter of 5-6 years back. Then I said, what is happening? If you are other end, then why do we have to have the festival? Why don't you have the objective evaluation of what we are doing? 12 controls are not running away. They are a deterministic problem. They have the deterministic answer, and the evidences will also be in the very. So what is it for which you have the option ABC? The answers are fixed, right? So why do we have to have this festival? If you are around there adhering to it, just choose a time that these 10 evidences at the click of the button, it's submitted. So those cultural changes we have brought, not only for PCI DSS, PA DSS, from normal festival, it's like a scientific meeting, like any other meeting, product meeting, right? So it's like a product engineering meeting now, right? Now this compliance as a service coming, wherein all evidence collection, logs, toolings are in place. I'm sure the burdens will come down, cost will also come down. The dependency on the individuals will also go down. So in the time to come, compliance as a service, I don't see it going very far away, but still I think there are the process and controls have to have fine balance. In order to simplify, it should not lead to a compromise. Like Rohit was saying that for identity, there are in the absence of, let's say, Aadhaar, since it is not equally available to everybody, right? So guys have found out the way that you have a Google safety net, you have a device fingerprinting, gesture controls. Many ways people have been able to find. So more you program, more power to code, and more power to AI ML, more power to better trained model, better threat modeling pattern, and then you have not perfect but near perfect CAS model, CAS.
Awesome. Yes. So compliance as a service. I don't know how many more things are going to come as a surface, but amazingly, we are left on the last 15 minutes. I do have 2 major points that I want to definitely table while we are at it. One of my points that I wanted to discuss was this multi-layered approach when we are doing, Rohit also touched on it. Sanjeev has also spoken about it a little bit. When we are talking about multi-filters that you have so that you ensure you're robust. Now, I know that both of you are more towards like the B2B side of site, and there is more services there. But from a consumer or a user experience, now that we're talking to a larger audience here, from a user experience point of view, sometimes it can be annoying. They understand, like even somebody like me, I understand I want my data to be protected. By the time you're asking me the 3rd time to choose a figure that looks up or something, or what looks like a car over here, it is annoying. I want to move away from that side. So what is the balance? How do you balance that you do have that multi-layered approach, but at least for a lay user, you haven't really made it crazy? Rohit, you go for it first, and then I know I'm going to twist it and bring it back to Sanjeev.
Sure. So, Noor, I think like for us, actually, it becomes very important, right? Because I think like on the one hand, you want to obviously keep customer journey very smooth, right? And very frictionless, right? Because it obviously helps the customer and of course the business, right? But on the other hand, you have this nuance that you have to manage. I think the way we go around it is, I think there are 2 parts to it, right? One is how are you, and the second is how are you managing the nuance. So, how are you managing the nuance? I think the way we go around it is, I think there are 2 parts to it, right? One is how are you, and the second is how are you managing the nuance. So, how are you managing the nuance? I think the way we go around it is, I think there are 2 parts to it, right? One is how are you, and the second is how are you managing the nuance. So, how are you managing the nuance? I think the way we go around it is, I think there are 2 parts to it, right? One is how are you, and the second is how are you managing the nuance. So, how are you managing the nuance? I think the way we go around it is, I think there are 2 parts to it, right? One is how are you, and the second is how are you managing the nuance. So, how are you managing the nuance? I think the way we go around it is, I think there are 2 parts to it, right? One is how are you, and the second is how are you managing the nuance. So, how are you managing the nuance? I think the way we go around it is, I think there are 2 parts to it, right? One So, like Sanjeev also touched on it, right? I mean, the more data that you build internally, right, around the customer, on understanding his profile, without even asking say for a lot of things, right? And today, I think we are in a world where a lot of passive data is also available, right? So, if you are, say, installing my app and coming to me, there's a lot of things about you that I already know without even asking you, right? So, can you now make use of it to do multiple level gradation or like build a user persona, right, on the back of it? Once you have it, then I think another thing that you can do, then you can have multiple layered flows, right? I mean, so based on the user, say the confidence that you have on the user profile, right? You can ask them certain things, or you can choose to not ask certain things, right? So for instance, like I'll give you an example, right? So say if you ask the user for a selfie, right, for your system. Now the thing is, once he gives that selfie, now you can do again automated image checks, and you can figure, whether this matches with the guy's ID documents or not. But the thing is, where say the score is below a certain threshold, so now you don't need to pin every guy to do say sort of a video check or a liveness check. But say guys below a certain threshold, now you can ask, why don't you open your video and you want to, I think basically do a liveness check on you. So now this allows a flow where say maybe 90% of the guys actually give the right photograph, and they're able to, get through that photo verification point very quickly. The other guys will actually have to turn on the video, but now you have these differentiated flows. Same thing can happen with the information that also you need, right? So again, say someone like you, when he say comes on a lending platform, if I'm able to say a certain amount of data on you, I don't need to like compulsorily ask you to provide me everything, like, give me a 3-month pay slips or your bank statement and everything. But I know I can let you go, right? Because you already seem pretty, I think high scoring person. But for say someone else, I can actually ask him to give me certain more information to validate and let him through the system. So I think the thing is, one, as I said, I think you should have an infrastructure to work with a lot of, I think, passive or indirect information, and you should have created technology to basically use it in your system and basically demarcate user person or his risk profile based on these parameters. So that is something you have to build internally. Secondly, as I said, I think you can build these gamified information flows, right? So you don't ask everyone for everything, but you have built these gamification flows. And I think the reason I call it gamification is because if you're say giving more pain to a certain guy, you might also associate with it with a certain incentive, right, that he can get in return for that. So it will again then depend on the domain, right? But you can ask them, right? In fact, I think a lot of apps also do it today, right? So if you give me this information, then I can, I think maybe give this something extra to you. So then user also has something in it, right? For them to go through that process. So how do you balance, I think, customer experience at that end? And I mean, that's something that you can tackle with gamification. But I think these two things actually can help you quite a lot to balance, I think, this trade-off.
All right, fair enough. Sanjeev, I want you to speak about it. I just want to twist it a little bit, which is, we're talking about balance right now. He's given us at least 2 ways of how we are doing this. But when you are as a customer, I also expect that if I have given you so much information, by now you should not ask me something like, can you tell me your account number again? I'm just making a very basic example. My expectation is that the brand will already know a little bit about me. The company will already know a little bit about me. And it is annoying that I have to tell you the whole thing again. So when you're looking at what maybe some of the trends may be emerging on this, what are you seeing? How are companies looking at, while definitely personalizing and customizing to whoever has come? And the first point that he mentioned, the tiered level approach, while they're doing that, but at the same time, it didn't go to a place where it could have led to some kind of a breach or a data fault.
So see, again, I think here, this all comes down to KYC, right? Ultimately, that you want to know your customer more and more. Yeah. And it's a very thin line that I decide to go ahead, I decide not to go ahead, right? So it's like, and you draw a line. More the data you have, more the confidence score you have, right? So ultimately, Rohit is in lending. We also do some kind of merchant side lending, right? So on merchant side, still you have the GST details, you have the GST based APIs, you get some kind of confidence score, you have the CIBILs to your rescue, so you don't have to really. I mean that side it's not that painful, right? But I mean the question here is how much is too much to ask, right? Right? How much is too much to ask, right? So how much is too much to ask is a function of how much is the customer in need of, right? So that, an app or program cannot decide, but gamification, like, Rohit said, is an excellent idea. That if you feel that you have been incentivized and you are in the need, you will definitely try, right? So it's like, for an individual, you need POI, you need POA. Without that, you can't even go ahead anywhere, right? A proof of identity and proof of address, if you don't have, it takes you nowhere. Beyond proof of identity and proof of address, what else do you need to be able to score? Of course, you have the device info. Possibly one guy will go ahead and said, I have the contact graphs. That a person having this phone number, I have given the loan, and there are 5 persons in his phone number. So what you are saying is that there has to be an element of intuitiveness and smartness, that, thode mein zyada, right? So take less, give more, right? So you have a lot of data which are indirect in nature, could be extrapolated, right? We were taught, extrapolation of the graph, right? That 3 points are given, derive the 4th point by doing the freehand, typing of the graph, freehand, so very, very same way here, like, you have so many indirect, information, contact graph, social graph, you have is, and now with offline eKYC allowed for everybody, right? By using share code and phone number, you get the address details and all. So in a way, essentially, you don't really have to ask too much, but again, it's a function of how much is the customer need. How much are they willing to, share, and and to what extent they are comfortable. But having said that, it's paramount that whatever they have given, there is an element of confidence building with the customer, that you are giving and putting your data in a very secure platform. It comes down to that, right? The moment you have one breach, you had it. Then there is no, it's a point of no return.
It is a point of no return. We are on last 6 minutes. I still have this whole topic to tackle about employee and management fraud training. And once again, this was something, Sanjeev, he was literally laying the tone of the discussions when he said about, again, my favorite code of the day is going to be adherence versus compliance. But how much of a role does this play right now in India? How much are you all probably seeing? I'm not talking about your own companies, because I do know that either you're coming from a place where you are like mentally attuned to it, or, just given the legacy, it has been happening. So I'm not trying to get a broader gauge. How much are we seeing that people are actually investing in employee and management in terms of fraud awareness training, and maybe some best practices that you are seeing in this? Let Sanjeev go first for this, the older brand.
Okay. No, so I think that's a favorite topic, and I can keep talking till cows come home, right? So like, this topic is very favorite to me. So in the sense, like, see, the point is, one, the PCI, PADSS, visa compliance, or PCI PIN compliance, or banks compliance, or network compliance, they all mandate that your employees get trained. Now, you can dilute by defining your training models, right? That I need to just get the tick marks and check boxes filled in, that I have trained so many guys, there is an attendance sheet. So that's where I say, such kind of compliance is compromised by design, right?
Yeah.
Right. That is the attendance checkbook, right? Attendance check boxes. So then like CTOs, CISOs, and CXOs have to take it far more seriously, and not wait for a breach or incidents to happen, right? Because incidents could be a point of no return also. So it may not give you an opportunity to relook and rethink.
Yes.
So what happens is that make people so let's say, if you say, my favorite question in an interview to any architect who I hire is that, where do you store the database password? And I kid you not, people do mostly wrong in that. Somebody will say, I have it in an open file. Somebody will say, I have it stored it in somewhere, like, yeah. So they might not be practicing it, but they might not be practicing it like that. They might have kept their database password safe, but somewhere, people take it too lightly, maybe, right? See, the point is, your application is making a connection to it. You and it is the key to your entire data. It cannot. So somebody asked the next question I ask is, can your DBS copy the data and go home with it? They said no. I said, then what stops them? Answer is not known. I have given full access to DB. How can you tell me no, right? You can copy you're creating back of it. But then the next question is that keep the data, give access to DBAs, but divide the keys into such a way that it requires a village to collude to compromise you. So meaning is that one employee or two employees alone should not be able to create the backup and take it home or take it anywhere in the drive and reconstruct the data and float it in anywhere they feel like, right? So even internally also divide passwords into the code, into the database, into the file systems in such a way that it takes 3-4 guys like custodians to be able to break into the system as such, because it is unintentional compromise are easier to happen. So it is not that employees will intend to do it, but by mistake things can happen. You may leave your database browser connections open, right? Things can go wrong. You may by default. So once, simple case, I'll not take the name of the companies, right? DBA incidentally ran a query which increased the card balance, right? Card balance. So it means card balance was kept in clear, and database administrator had the right. This is for some company. Somewhere I read the use case. So DBA having full right. Tomorrow, let's say in case of Rohit's company, somebody increases the limit based on a tier. It's just one command, right? Update this table where this is. This like online, right? This is a catastrophe, right? Why will you not encrypt the amount? Why encryption is only to pin, and why not an amount? Why should it tamper it? So even the data at rest keep in a useless state. So data at rest has to be kept in a useless state, that even if you take my backup, I have the key vaults with me. I have keys vault with me. Unless you connect the keys vault, an entire village or tribe colludes. And if your company colludes for a fraud, then you are done anyway, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So it requires a massive collusion. Anyway.
So just to recap what he said, Rohit, you must have got all of what he said. I am like frantically taking notes. But for me, what 2 points really stand out is don't wait for the incidents when it especially comes to employee training, and you should really go for, or rather, if you're going to do it only as a formality, it is compromised by design, he said. And then he gave a larger example about how you should not take even the little things or the simple things very lightly. You have to be serious in terms of how you're protecting yourself and how multi-layers of protection must come in play within the system with multi-stakeholders. Anything you want to add to that, Rohit, when we're talking about best practices from a people standpoint while making this infra?
Right. So, Noor, I think Sanjeev covered, in great detail in terms of how, say, internal fraud should be, captured against, right? Yes. So how do you make sure your tech is, protected enough, your processes and people are exactly kept in the loop, right? So I think those are obviously, very right things, and must for especially any, tech-driven company, right? So it has to be done. One only thing that I would love to add is that, so while this captures obviously what's happening internally, right? How do you make sure you're also able to capture what's happening outside the company, right? So for instance, that's why I said, what I have seen in general, right? Fraud generally, because they start small, especially customer frauds, right? There are two problems that happen. One, people don't really pay enough attention to it unless it balloons up, right? And as I said, once it increases very fast. That is one problem. Second problem that we have seen is the lack of right label data as well. So for instance, today, say, obviously we hear a lot about a customer, getting a fraud, basically defrauded because someone asked for his UPI pin, right, and made the payment into his account, or something else happened. Now it's not very easy for customers also to report, right? Whether fraud happened or not. Even if they do, then obviously company also has to figure whether it's the customer genuinely reporting it or not. So the issue is that doing the right labeling in terms of whether this instance was a fraud or not, it's not easy. And the thing is, if you're not capturing it right, then your machine learning algorithms can also not learn right? Because they need the right label data for that. So you need to, create a culture of, capturing this sooner. I would rather say be conservative on that side than, be ignore and wait for confirmation, right? Because as I said, the risk is too high. So I think how you are creating that internally, are you creating a separate team? Are you encouraging them? Are you incentivizing them to, find more about it rather than, because a lot of companies, try to hush it, because obviously no one wants to show that our systems are, like not capable of capturing this. So how do you make sure you encourage that and build that culture? And I think organization to support that. I think that is something which can then work in unison with how the internal teams are structured to create, I think, a fraud-proof system. But yeah.
Right. All right, awesome. Last couple of minutes left, gentlemen. I do want to take this as advice. We more or less tabled the questions that I had in mind. I did want to speak a little bit about some of the text, but you gentlemen have really given me better answers than I was hoping for. So let's just go with advice. It's literally last 3 minutes, so both of you get like a minute each. Advice for players, especially, it's a very broad topic. So if I immediately want to go back today and do maybe like a check, that all right, is my infrastructure even at say a 7 on 10? What are some of the questions I should ask myself today? That is, either Sanjeev can take it or Rohit, and then I'll change it again when I ask the next person. Hands up on who's taking it.
Go ahead.
Sure. So I mean, see, I think me and Sanjeev, I think we have covered, most of the things here, right? I would say,
yes.
One, I think make sure, your tech captures the right things. You have created the right infra, because everything starts with a detection. And number two, you have, I think, people, who are actually making sure that they're really taking the right action on it, or at least flagging it, I think, to the concerned teams and people. So that's, I think, number two. I think number three would be, in my view, I think creating the right metrics to make sure, I think it's voiced correctly. It's actually getting flagged, I think, to the right guys. Because say someone like Sanjeev, he would obviously get to know, especially I think given organizations also, I think, become pretty large over time, right? So it's getting very difficult in that sense. So I think once you take care of, I think, the people and processes, I think rest of the things, at least, then you can take the right action and I think, start dealing with them. But if these two are not right, then I think it anyway becomes impossible in my view. So I think those two should be a good place to start.
The first thing that you go back today from our audience is these are the first two things you should look at to see if you're ticking the right boxes without just making it a checklist. Sanjeev, you want to add?
So I think I'll try to sum up what I said. Essentially, right? Then training, internally, getting the right kind of systems in place. And how do you decide what kind of right system is for you? So there has to be dependency graph in what kind of segments you are, and there could be no answer which fits all. But the point is, any kind of data you have, any kind of data you have, just see what governance principles are laid around it, and read those guiding principles as very, very seriously, right? So those principles are laid. Don't read it very, very casually. And get the right folks around it and get those action, right? Be it, let's say again, I'll re-invoke. So if you are a payment company, OWASP top 10 or PCI DSS, PA DSS, PCI PIN, and there are ITGC guidelines against the governance and the compliance, that what flows in the company and what flows out. There is process based check. So there are numerous guiding principles available, and it's just a matter that it cannot be a casual read just because it is not a mainstream business. Risk is mainstream, and fraud becomes super mainstream when fraud happens, right? So fraud is to be taken more seriously, and again, the governance principles are to be one has to stick to.
All right, gentlemen. We were blessed because we had two extremely smart brains with us right now to answer so many questions, with some of which, to be honest, even I was all over the place while asking. I'm going to add one point ahead of everything else, which is find a brilliant fraudster, and which is what Rohit said in the beginning, and let them go and really crack your system and see what are the different things that can go wrong with what you're doing. That's what you must do at the word go. With that, I'm going to thank Rohit. I'm going to thank Sanjeev for awesome comments and for your time. Thank you, both of you.